In the opulent halls of Chateau Vermeil, a legendary vintner raises his ruby-encrusted chalice to toast his finest wine, only to collapse, poisoned as the chalice shatters. Hercule Poirot, the master detective, unravels a web of ambition and betrayal among a cunning rival, a volatile customer, and a nervous sommelier. With cyanide in the chalice and secrets in the shadows, Poirot's gray cells reveal a chilling conspiracy where loyalty crumbles under desperation. Will justice prevail in this intoxicating tale of murder? Chapter 1. The Invitation to Chateau Vermeil. Hercule Poirot stood before the tall, gilded mirror in his Paris apartment, his nimble fingers adjusting the knot of his silk tie with the precision of a watchmaker. His mustache, a masterpiece of symmetry, gleamed under the soft glow of the chandelier, each hair aligned as if by divine decree. He tilted his head, inspecting his reflection, and gave a small, satisfied nod. Tonight was no ordinary evening. It was an occasion of refinement, a summons to Chateau Vermeil, a vineyard nestled in the rolling hills of Bordeaux, famed for its crimson chalice, a red wine that poets might liken to ambrosia. The invitation, penned in the flowing script of Monsieur Etienne Dubois, the vineyard's celebrated vintner, had promised the unveiling of a new vintage, and Poirot, ever a devotee of life's finer pleasures, could not resist such an allure. Beside him, Captain Arthur Hastings fumbled with his cufflinks, his cheerful voice filling the room with tales of Chateau Vermeil's storied past. They say Dubois' great-grandfather planted the first vines during Napoleon's reign, Hastings said, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. The Crimson Chalice has won awards across Europe, you know. Quite the event we're heading to, Poirot. Poirot smiled indulgently, his friend's exuberance a familiar counterpoint to his own measured calm. Oui, mon ami, he replied, slipping on his polished shoes. But it is not only the wine that interests me. It is the people who gather around it. Their car, a sleek black Citroën, glided through the French countryside as the sun dipped low, painting the vineyards in hues of amber and rose. The air carried the scent of ripe grapes and earth, a perfume Poirot inhaled with quiet appreciation. Hastings, ever talkative, pointed out landmarks, a crumbling abbey, a quaint village, while Poirot's keen eyes scanned the horizon, where Chateau Vermeil emerged like a vision from a bygone era. Its stone turrets rose against the sky, ivy clinging to its walls, and its windows glowed with the promise of festivity. The car rolled to a stop before the chateau's wrought-iron gates, where liveried footmen ushered guests toward the gardens. The scene was one of elegance. Men in tailored evening dress, women in gowns that shimmered under the lantern light, and the soft clink of glasses mingling with laughter. Poirot, his cane tapping lightly on the gravel path, observed the crowd with the precision of a chess master studying the board. Among them he noted three figures of particular interest. Madame Claire Beaumont, a rival vintner, moved with the grace of a panther, her sharp smile cutting through the pleasantries as she conversed with a cluster of admirers. Her dark eyes held a calculating glint, as if measuring each guest for their worth. Monsieur Lucien Fournier, a portly man with a florid complexion, clutched a glass of wine with proprietary zeal, his laughter booming across the lawn. Poirot recalled whispers of his wealth and his insatiable appetite for rare vintages. And then there was Mademoiselle Sophie Laurent, the chateau's sommelier, a slender figure in a simple black dress, her hands clasped tightly as she directed the staff. Her eyes, darting from guest to guest, betrayed a nervousness that piqued Poirot's curiosity. The guests were ushered into the grand hall, where a long oak table gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Bottles of crimson chalice stood like sentinels, their labels catching the light. Etienne Dubois, a robust man with a shock of silver hair and a presence that commanded the room, stepped forward, a silver chalice encrusted with rubies cradled in his hands. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice rich as the wine he championed. "Tonight we unveil the 1925 Crimson Chalice, a vintage to rival the gods." He raised the chalice, its jewels winking, and the crowd murmured in anticipation. Poirot, seated near the front, watched not the chalice but the faces around it. Madame Beaumont's tight smile, Fournier's eager grin, and Sophie Laurent's sudden pallor as she stood by the table, a decanter in her trembling hands. The air was thick with expectation, but Poirot's sharp senses detected something else. A faint discord, like a false note in an otherwise perfect symphony. He leaned toward Hastings, his voice low. "Mon ami, there is something here that is not as it seems." Hastings, caught up in the moment, chuckled. "Oh, Poirot, you see mysteries everywhere." But Poirot's gray cells, those tireless instruments of deduction, were already at work, sensing that the evening's elegance masked a shadow waiting to fall. Chapter 2. The Shattered Chalice. The grand hall of Chateau Vermeil, resplendent with its vaulted ceiling and tapestries depicting pastoral scenes of vintners at work, seemed to hold its breath as Monsieur Etienne Dubois raised the ruby-encrusted chalice to his lips. The silver gleamed under the chandelier's glow, and the assembled guests, some 50 in number, a mix of Bordeaux's elite, wine critics, and foreign connoisseurs, watched with rapt attention. Hercule Poirot, seated at a table near the dais, his small, precise hands folded neatly before him, observed not the chalice but the man who held it. Dubois, a figure of robust vitality despite his silver hair, exuded the confidence of a king in his domain. His eyes, bright with pride, swept over the crowd as he prepared to taste the 1925 Crimson Chalice, the vintage he had proclaimed his masterpiece. Beside Poirot, Captain Hastings leaned forward, his face alight with anticipation. "What a moment, Poirot," he whispered. "They say this vintage is unlike anything Dubois has produced before." Poirot's mustache twitched, but his response was a mere nod, his attention fixed on the subtleties of the scene. He noted Madame Claire Beaumont, seated 2 tables away, her elegant fingers tightening around her glass, her lips curved in a smile that did not reach her eyes. Monsieur Lucien Fournier, his bulk spilling over the edges of his chair, mopped his brow with a silk handkerchief, his gaze greedy as it followed the chalice. Mademoiselle Sophie Laurent, the sommelier, stood near the dais, her posture rigid, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles gleamed white against her black dress. The air, thick with the scent of oak and fermented grapes, carried a tension that Poirot's keen senses could not ignore. Dubois, his voice resonant, concluded his toast. "To the Crimson Chalice, a wine born of earth and ambition, a legacy for the ages." He brought the chalice to his lips, sipped deeply, and for a moment his face glowed with satisfaction. Then, in an instant, the glow vanished. His eyes widened, his free hand clutched at his throat, and a strangled gasp escaped him. The chalice slipped from his grasp, striking the stone floor with a metallic clang that echoed like a gunshot. Shards of silver scattered, the rubies catching the light like droplets of blood. Dubois staggered, his knees buckled, and he collapsed, his body crumpling onto the dais with a thud that silenced the room. A woman's scream pierced the stillness, followed by a cacophony of gasps and shouts. Guests surged forward, chairs scraping against the floor, glasses toppling in their haste. Poirot remained seated, his eyes darting over the chaos, cataloging every detail. Hastings, already on his feet, exclaimed, "Good Lord, Poirot, he's collapsed!" "Is he?" But Poirot raised a hand, silencing his friend, his gaze fixed on the fallen vintner. Dr. Jacques Moreau, a local physician and guest, pushed through the crowd, his medical bag in hand. He knelt beside Dubois, his fingers probing for a pulse. The room watched, breathless, as Moreau's expression darkened. "He is dead," he announced, his voice steady but grim. "Poison, I suspect. There is a faint scent of bitter almonds on his breath. Cyanide, perhaps." The word poison rippled through the crowd, igniting whispers and fearful glances. Poirot, rising with deliberate calm, approached the dais, his cane tapping softly. He leaned over the body, his nostrils flaring as he confirmed the doctor's observation. The acrid, unmistakable odor of cyanide lingered about Dubois' lips. His eyes moved to the shattered chalice, its fragments glinting on the floor. A faint residue, barely visible, clung to the inner curve of one shard. Poirot's gray cells stirred, a puzzle taking shape in his mind. The heavy oak doors of the hall burst open, and Inspector Giraud of the Bordeaux Gendarmerie strode in, his uniform crisp, his face set in a scowl of authority. A man of action, Giraud had little patience for subtleties, a trait that had often set him at odds with Poirot in past encounters. "Clear the room," he barked, his mustache bristling. "No one leaves the chateau until I say so." His men fanned out, herding the guests toward the far end of the hall where they clustered in anxious knots. Poirot, undeterred by Giraud's bluster, knelt beside the chalice's fragments, his gloved fingers hovering over them. "Monsieur l'inspecteur," he said, his voice soft but firm, "I advise you to preserve these pieces with care. They are, I believe, the heart of this tragedy." Giraud snorted, his eyes narrowing. "Poirot, always meddling with your little theories. This is a police matter. The poison was likely in the wine bottle. Simple enough." He gestured to a constable to collect the bottle from which the chalice had been filled. Poirot's lips curved in a faint smile. "Non, non, Inspector. The bottle was poured for many glasses, yet only Monsieur Dubois is dead. The chalice, it was his alone. The poison was meant for him and him only." Giraud's scowl deepened, but he did not argue, instead ordering the shards gathered into an evidence bag. Hastings, hovering at Poirot's side, whispered, "Do you really think the chalice is the key? Couldn't someone have tampered with his glass earlier?" Poirot shook his head, his eyes gleaming with certainty. "The chalice, mon ami, is no ordinary vessel. It is a family heirloom used only by Dubois for such occasions. To poison it required access and intent, qualities we must seek among those closest to him." As the gendarmes began their preliminary interviews, Poirot moved through the hall, his small, neat figure almost invisible amidst the chaos. He approached Madame Claire Beaumont, who stood apart, her composure a stark contrast to the flustered guests around her. "Madame," Poirot said, bowing slightly, "a tragic evening, is it not?" Her eyes, sharp as cut glass, met his. "Tragic, yes, Monsieur Poirot," she replied, her voice smooth. "Etienne was a titan in our world. His loss will be felt." Her words were polite, but Poirot noted the absence of warmth, the faintest tremor in her fingers as she adjusted her shawl. He moved on to Monsieur Lucien Fournier, who was mopping his brow again, his face flushed from more than wine. "Monsieur Fournier," Poirot said, "you were a great admirer of Monsieur Dubois' work, non?" Fournier's eyes darted nervously. "Oh, yes, a genius. I've bought his wine for years. Dreadful business, this." His words tumbled out too quickly, and Poirot noted the sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cool evening air. Mademoiselle Sophie Laurent was harder to find, having slipped to the edge of the hall, where she directed a maid to clear a spilled glass. Poirot approached silently, his presence startling her. "Mademoiselle," he said, his tone gentle but probing, "you poured the wine for Monsieur Dubois, did you not?" She nodded, her eyes avoiding his. "Yes, I filled the chalice from the bottle, as always." I don't understand how this happened." Her voice quavered, and Poirot observed the faint tremor in her hands, the way her gaze flickered toward the dais. The hall was now a hive of activity, with Giraud's men taking statements and the guests murmuring their theories. Poirot returned to the dais where Dr. Moreau was speaking to a constable. "Doctor," Poirot said, "you are certain of cyanide?" Moreau nodded. "The symptoms are unmistakable. Rapid collapse, the almond-like odor. Death would have been near instantaneous." Poirot thanked him, his mind racing. Cyanide required careful handling. It was not a poison one stumbled upon by chance. The killer had planned this act with precision. He examined the table where the chalice had stood before Dubois' toast. The bottle, now in police custody, had been opened that evening, its cork intact until Sophie Laurent had decanted it. Other glasses filled from the same bottle showed no signs of tampering. Guests had sipped them without incident. Poirot's gaze returned to the chalice's shards, now sealed in a bag but still vivid in his memory. The silver was thick, the craftsmanship robust. It would not have shattered easily. The break, he suspected, was no accident. Giraud, overseeing the removal of Dubois' body, caught Poirot's eye. "You're wasting time, Poirot," he said gruffly. "We'll test the bottle and have our man by morning." Poirot's smile was polite but unyielding. "Test the bottle by all means, Inspector, but I wager you will find it innocent. The chalice, it tells a different story." As the guests were escorted to the chateau's drawing room to await further questioning, Poirot lingered, his mind reconstructing the scene. The chalice had been filled, raised, sipped, and dropped, all within moments. The poison had acted swiftly, but how had it been administered? He recalled Sophie Laurent's nervous demeanor, her proximity to the chalice before the toast. Had she placed the poison? Or was she merely a witness caught in the web of another's design? Madame Beaumont's cool detachment suggested a mind capable of such a plot, while Fournier's agitation hinted at secrets of his own. Hastings, rejoining Poirot, looked shaken. "It's ghastly, Poirot. To think someone in this room poisoned him in front of us all." Poirot nodded, his eyes distant. "Oui, mon ami, it is bold, this crime. But boldness betrays motive, and motive betrays the heart. We shall find it." The hall was now nearly empty, save for a few gendarmes and the lingering scent of wine and tragedy. Poirot took a final look at the dais, imagining Dubois' last moments. The pride, the sip, the betrayal. The chalice, he murmured. It was not merely broken. It was destroyed to hide the truth. He turned to Hastings, his voice low but resolute. Come, we have work to do. The little gray cells, they are only beginning. As they stepped into the cool night air, the chateau's towers loomed above, silent witnesses to the evening's horror. Poirot's mind, however, was far from silent, piecing together the fragments of a puzzle that would soon reveal a killer's hand. Chapter 3. The suspects emerge. The drawing room of Chateau Vermeil, where the guests had been herded after the grim events in the Grand Hall, was a study in opulence and unease. Heavy velvet drapes framed tall windows, through which the moon cast a silvery glow over the polished parquet floor. Gilt-framed portraits of Dubois ancestors gazed down impassively, their eyes seeming to follow the restless crowd. The air was thick with the murmur of speculation, the clink of glasses set aside, and the occasional sob from a shaken guest. Hercule Poirot, seated in a high-backed chair near a marble fireplace, appeared almost serene, his small hands folded neatly, his eyes darting from face to face with the precision of a metronome. Captain Hastings beside him fidgeted, his honest face creased with concern. "It's a devilish business, Poirot," he whispered. "Poison in front of us all. Who could have done it?" Poirot's mustache twitched, but his voice was low and measured. "Patience, mon ami. The truth, it reveals itself in the details, the glance, the gesture, the word unspoken." He leaned back, his gaze settling on Inspector Giraud, who stood at the room's center, barking orders to his constables. Giraud's approach was all bluster and efficiency, his clipboard a shield against the subtleties Poirot prized. "Statements from everyone," Giraud declared. "No one leaves until we have answers." The guests, still in their evening finery, exchanged wary glances, their earlier conviviality replaced by suspicion. Poirot, however, had no intention of waiting for Giraud's methodical interrogations. He preferred to observe, to let the suspects betray themselves in the unguarded moments between questions. Rising with a quiet grace, he moved through the room, his cane a soft punctuation on the floor, his presence unobtrusive yet commanding. His first stop was Madame Claire Beaumont, who stood near a rosewood table sipping water from a crystal glass. Her auburn hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and her emerald gown accentuated her poised figure. But Poirot noted the faint tightness at the corners of her mouth, a sign of strain beneath her polished exterior. "Madame Beaumont," Poirot said, bowing slightly. "A tragedy most profound, is it not?" She turned, her eyes meeting his with a cool intensity. "Indeed, Monsieur Poirot," she replied, her voice smooth as velvet. "Etienne Dubois was a giant among vintners. His loss is a blow to us all." Her words were measured, but Poirot detected a rehearsed quality, as if she had prepared her response. He pressed gently. "You and Monsieur Dubois were competitors, no? Such rivalries, they can breed tensions." Her smile was a blade, sharp and fleeting. "Competition is the lifeblood of our trade, monsieur." Etienne played the game well, perhaps too well. He drove many to the brink with his tactics. She paused, her fingers brushing the stem of her glass. "But I am a businesswoman, not a murderer." Poirot nodded, his expression bland, but his mind cataloguing her words. "The brink," she had said. "A hint of bitterness, perhaps." He recalled whispers of Dubois' ruthless pricing strategies which had squeezed smaller vineyards like Madame Beaumont's. Her composure was admirable, but Poirot sensed ambition coiled beneath it, a motive that could fester into something darker. He moved on to Monsieur Lucien Fournier, who had retreated to a corner, his bulk slouched in a plush armchair. His face, flushed from wine and nerves, glistened under the lamplight, and his gold watch caught Poirot's eye, a symbol of wealth, perhaps overstretched. Monsieur Fournier, Poirot began, his tone amiable. You were a devoted patron of Chateau Vermeil, I understand? Fournier straightened, his handkerchief dabbing at his brow. Devoted, yes. I've spent a fortune on Dubois' wines, the Crimson Chalice, nothing like it. His enthusiasm rang hollow, and Poirot noted the tremor in his voice. Yet, Poirot continued, I heard of a dispute, perhaps? A matter of a delayed shipment? Fournier's eyes widened, then narrowed. A misunderstanding, nothing more. Etienne could be stubborn, but I'd never harm him. His protest was too vehement, and Poirot's gray cells registered the unease beneath it. A man of Fournier's extravagance might resent a slight, especially if it wounded his pride. Mademoiselle Sophie Laurent proved more elusive. Poirot found her near the servants' entrance, speaking in hushed tones to a young footman. Her black dress blended with the shadows, but her pale face betrayed her agitation. As Poirot approached, the footman scurried away, and Sophie turned, startled. Mademoiselle Laurent, Poirot said, his voice soft but insistent. You played a vital role this evening, pouring the wine for Monsieur Dubois' Chalice, oui? She nodded, her hands twisting together. Yes, I prepared the chalice as always. I decanted the wine myself. Her voice was steady, but her eyes flickered toward the door as if longing to escape. And the chalice, Poirot pressed, it was in your care before the toast? She hesitated, then nodded. I polished it, ensured it was ready. It's an honor to handle it. Her words were clipped, and Poirot noted the faint flush creeping up her neck. Was it fear or guilt? He stepped closer, his tone gentle but probing. You seem troubled, mademoiselle. Is there something you wish to share? Her lips parted, then closed, and she shook her head. It's just the shock, monsieur. I've worked for Monsieur Dubois for years. To see him fall like that. Her voice broke and she turned away, but Poirot's sharp eyes caught the way her fingers clenched, as if holding back a secret. Returning to Hastings, Poirot found his friend deep in conversation with a wine critic who was expounding on Dubois' innovations. Hastings broke off as Poirot approached. Any luck, old chap? He asked. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Look, mon ami, is for those without method. I have observed, and already the pieces begin to form a picture. He lowered his voice. Madame Beaumont speaks of rivalry with a bitterness that lingers. Monsieur Fournier protests too much, his pride perhaps wounded. And Mademoiselle Laurent, she hides something, I am certain. The room buzzed with Giraud's interrogations, his voice cutting through the murmurs. You there, he called to a trembling maid. Did you see anyone near the chalice before the toast? The maid shook her head, her eyes wide. Giraud's approach, Poirot mused, was like a bulldog's, tenacious but blind to nuance. He would question everyone, but he would miss the subtleties of human nature that Poirot sought. Poirot's attention returned to the drawing room's details. The half-empty glasses, the scattered programs from the tasting, the faint scent of wine still lingering. He approached a side table where a decanter sat, its contents untouched since the tragedy. A constable guarded it, but Poirot's request to examine it was met with a grudging nod. He sniffed the decanter's rim, detecting only the rich aroma of the crimson chalice, no trace of cyanide. "As I thought," he murmured to Hastings. "The poison was not in the bottle or the decanter. It was in the chalice itself, a targeted act." Hastings frowned. "But how? Someone would have had to place it there right under everyone's noses." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Or before, mon ami. The chalice was prepared in advance, was it not? By one who had access and opportunity." His thoughts returned to Sophie Laurent, her nervous hands, her evasive gaze. But he cautioned himself against haste. The picture was not yet complete. As Giraud continued his interviews, Poirot slipped out to the terrace, where the night air was cool and the stars glittered above the vineyards. He needed solitude to let his gray cells work undisturbed. The chalice, he mused, was the key, not only to the method but to the motive. Why poison Dubois in such a public way? Why shatter the chalice? The act was theatrical, deliberate, meant to send a message, or to obscure one. Hastings joined him, his face etched with worry. "Poirot, do you think it's one of them, Beaumont Fournier or the sommelier girl?" Poirot gazed at the moonlit vines, his voice soft. "One of them, perhaps, or more. The heart of this crime lies in betrayal, Hastings. Someone close to Dubois, someone he trusted, struck him down. We must look beyond the surface to the desires and fears that drive them." The terrace door opened and a constable summoned them back for Giraud's briefing. As they re-entered the drawing room, Poirot's mind was alight with possibilities. The suspects had emerged, their faces clear in his thoughts, each hiding a fragment of the truth. The game, as he often called it, had begun, and Hercule Poirot was determined to play it to its end. Chapter 4. The Sommelier's Secret. The morning after the tragedy at Chateau Vermeil dawned crisp and clear, the Bordeaux sun casting long shadows across the vineyard's orderly rows of vines. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, stood at the edge of the chateau's terrace, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes tracing the gentle slopes where the crimson chalice grapes had flourished. The serenity of the landscape belied the chaos of the previous night, but Poirot's mind was far from serene. His gray cells, those tireless instruments of deduction, churned through the details of Etienne Dubois' death. The poisoned chalice, the shattered silver, the nervous glance of Mademoiselle Sophie Laurent. It was she, the young sommelier, who occupied his thoughts now, her unease a thread he intended to unravel. Captain Hastings emerged from the chateau, his face still clouded with the shock of the murder. "Poirot, you're up early?" he said, rubbing his eyes. "Couldn't sleep thinking about that poor chap Dubois?" Poirot turned, his mustache perfectly aligned, his expression serene yet alert. "Sleep, mon ami, is for those without a puzzle to solve. I have been considering Mademoiselle Laurent. There is something she conceals, and I mean to discover what it is." The two men descended the stone steps toward the cellars, where the chateau's vast collection of wines slumbered in cool, shadowed vaults. Poirot had learned from a footman that Sophie Laurent was there cataloging bottles, a task he suspected she had taken up to avoid scrutiny. The cellars were a labyrinth of stone arches, their air heavy with the scent of oak and fermentation. Barrels lined the walls, their surfaces etched with the Dubois crest, while racks of bottles gleamed faintly in the dim light of electric lamps. At the far end, Sophie stood at a wooden table, her slender frame bent over a ledger, her pencil moving swiftly as she noted inventory. She did not hear Poirot's approach, his cane muffled by the stone floor, and when he spoke, her head jerked up, her pencil clattering to the table. "Mademoiselle Laurent," Poirot said, his voice soft but carrying the weight of authority. "A moment, if you please." Her eyes wide and wary met his, and he noted the faint tremor in her hands as she clasped them together. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice striving for calm, I am busy. The cellar must be maintained even after—" Her words trailed off, and she gestured vaguely toward the ledger. Poirot's smile was gentle, almost paternal, but his eyes missed nothing. "Oui, mademoiselle, duty persists even in tragedy. But I wish to speak of the chalice, the one you prepared for Monsieur Dubois." Her face paled, and she took a step back, her shoulder brushing against a rack of bottles. "I told you last night," she said, her voice rising slightly. "I polished it, filled it from the decanter." That was all. Poirot tilted his head, studying her as one might a delicate painting. "And yet, mademoiselle, you seem troubled. Your hands, they tremble. Your eyes, they avoid mine. Is there something more you wish to share with Hercule Poirot?" Sophie's lips parted, then closed, and for a moment silence hung between them. Hastings, standing a few paces behind, shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension but uncertain how to intervene. Finally, Sophie spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's nothing, monsieur. The shock of Monsieur Dubois' death, it has shaken me. He was my mentor, my employer. I owe him everything." Her words were earnest, but Poirot noted the slight hesitation before everything, as if the word carried a weight she dared not acknowledge. He stepped closer, his tone soothing yet insistent. "Mademoiselle, you are young, talented, a sommelier of great skill. Monsieur Dubois trusted you with his most prized possession, the chalice. Tell me, was it truly as fragile as you claimed? A silver heirloom, centuries old, yet it shattered like glass upon the floor." Sophie's eyes flickered, and she turned to the ledger, flipping a page as if to distract herself. "It was old," she said, her voice flat. "Silver can become brittle with age. I suppose it broke easily when it fell." Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his skepticism. He had examined the chalice's shards, albeit briefly, before Inspector Giraud's men whisked them away. The silver was thick, its craftsmanship robust, designed to endure generations. A fall, even onto stone, should not have shattered it so completely. He chose not to press this point yet, instead shifting his approach. "You handled the chalice before the toast, oui? Did anyone else touch it after you prepared it?" Sophie shook her head, her movements quick. "No, monsieur. I placed it on the table myself. No one else came near it." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And the decanter from which you poured, did you examine it closely?" Sophie's hand stilled, and she met his gaze, her eyes steady for the first time. "The decanter was clean, the wine untouched. I opened the bottle myself, as I always do for such occasions." Certainty was convincing, but Poirot's mind lingered on the chalice, not the wine. The poison, he was certain, had been in the vessel itself. a fact Sophie's answers did not address. He paced slowly along the rack of bottles, his cane tapping rhythmically, his mind turning over her words. "You have worked for Monsieur Dubois for how long, mademoiselle?" he asked, pausing to study a dusty label. 5 years, she replied, her voice steadier now. "He trained me, taught me everything about wine. I started as a maid, but he saw my potential." There was pride in her tone, but also a trace of something else. Resentment, perhaps? Poirot filed it away, his gray cells weaving connections. "And in those 5 years," he continued, turning to face her, "you grew close to him, non? A mentor, a father figure, perhaps?" Sophie's cheeks flushed, and she looked away, her fingers tightening on the ledger. "He was kind to me," she said softly. "But he was a hard man, too. Demanding. He expected perfection." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. Her words hinted at a complex relationship, one that might harbor secrets beyond professional loyalty. Before he could probe further, the cellar door creaked open and a young maid appeared, her apron smudged with flour. "Mademoiselle Laurent," she said, her voice hesitant. "The inspector wishes to see you in the library." Sophie's face tightened, but she nodded, closing the ledger with a snap. "Excuse me, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her tone formal. She hurried past, her steps quick, leaving Poirot and Hastings alone in the cellar's gloom. Hastings exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "She's nervous as a cat, Poirot. Do you think she's hiding something?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Oh, oui, mon ami. Mademoiselle Laurent carries a burden, though whether it is guilt or fear I cannot yet say. Her lie about the chalice. It is deliberate. She knows more than she reveals." He tapped his cane against the floor, his mind racing. "We must learn more of her past, her connection to Dubois. And we must see the chalice's remains again." They returned to the chateau's main floor, where the atmosphere remained taut. Guests lingered in the drawing room, their conversations hushed, while Giraud's men moved through the halls collecting statements. Poirot sought out the inspector, who was in the library scribbling notes at a mahogany desk. "Monsieur Poirot," Giraud said, his tone laced with irritation. "You're still here poking about? We have the bottle in custody, and the chemist will confirm the poison soon enough." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And the chalice, Inspector. Have you examined its fragments?" Giraud waved a hand dismissively. "A broken cup, nothing more. The poison was in the wine." Poirot's smile was polite but firm. "Permit me to disagree. The chalice holds the secret, and I would see it if you please." Grudgingly, Giraud allowed Poirot to view the evidence, stored in a locked case in the library. The shards, sealed in a cloth bag, were laid out on the desk. Poirot donned his gloves and examined them under a magnifying glass, his movements precise. The silver was indeed thick, the edges of the breaks jagged, suggesting force rather than fragility. A faint residue clung to one shard, a powder that confirmed his suspicion of cyanide. "You see, Inspector," Poirot said, pointing to the residue. "The poison was here, not in the bottle. And the chalice was broken deliberately to conceal the method." Giraud scoffed but made a note, his skepticism warring with Poirot's certainty. Hastings, peering over Poirot's shoulder, whispered, "Good heavens, Poirot, you're right. But who could have done it?" Poirot straightened, his eyes distant. "Someone with access, mon ami. Someone who knew the chalice's significance and had the opportunity to tamper with it." Mademoiselle Laurent is the key, but she is not alone in this puzzle. As they left the library, Poirot's thoughts returned to Sophie's trembling hands, her evasive answers. She was a young woman of talent, bound to Dubois by years of mentorship, yet her unease suggested a deeper story. Was she a pawn in another scheme, or did her loyalty mask a betrayal? The chateau, with its secrets hidden in stone and shadow, held the answers, and Poirot was determined to find them. Chapter 5. A Competitor's Ambition. The sun climbed higher over Bordeaux, its rays filtering through the tall windows of Chateau Vermeil, casting intricate patterns on the polished floors. Hercule Poirot, his morning tisane savored with the precision of a ritual, stood in the chateau's library, his mind a whirl of deductions. The death of Etienne Dubois, struck down by poison in his cherished chalice, was no mere crime of passion. It was a calculated act, and Poirot's gray cells were drawn to the threads of motive weaving through the suspects. Mademoiselle Sophie Laurent's nervous demeanor lingered in his thoughts, but this morning his focus turned to Madame Claire Beaumont, the rival vintner whose cool exterior masked a fire Poirot sensed could burn fiercely. Captain Hastings, ever the faithful companion, joined Poirot as they prepared to depart for Madame Beaumont's vineyard, Château d'Argent, a half-hour's drive from Vermeil. An invitation had arrived at dawn, penned in her elegant hand, requesting Poirot's presence to discuss matters of mutual interest. Hastings, adjusting his hat, remarked, "Rather bold of her, Poirot, inviting you to her turf after last night's horror. Think she's trying to clear her name?" Poirot's eyes gleamed, his mustache twitching. "Bold, oui, mon ami, but boldness can be a mask. Madame Beaumont wishes to control the narrative, but Hercule Poirot sees beyond such performances. Their car wound through the countryside, past vineyards basking in the September light, until Château d'Argent came into view. Unlike Vermeil's grand, almost feudal splendor, d'Argent was smaller, its stone facade weathered but proud, its gardens meticulous yet modest. A footman ushered them into a parlor where Madame Beaumont awaited, her auburn hair catching the sunlight, her emerald eyes sharp as she rose to greet them. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," she said, her voice smooth as her own vintage. "Thank you for coming. A dreadful affair at Vermeil, and I thought clarity might serve us all." She gestured to a table set with crystal glasses and a decanter of her vineyard's finest red, Château d'Argent's Étoile Rouge. "A taste, perhaps," she offered, pouring a glass with practiced grace. Poirot declined with a polite wave, his preference for tisane unwavering, but Hastings accepted, sipping appreciatively. "Excellent wine, madame," he said, earning a nod from their hostess. Poirot, observing her every move, noted the confidence in her posture, the way her fingers lingered on the decanter as if anchoring herself. "Madame," Poirot began, seating himself in a cushioned chair, his cane resting across his knees. "You speak of clarity, yet the death of Monsieur Dubois casts a shadow. You were his rival, no? A vintner of ambition whose star has risen, but perhaps not so brightly as his. Madame Beaumont's smile was a study in control, her lips curving without warmth. "Rivalry is the heartbeat of our trade, Monsieur Poirot." Etienne was a formidable adversary. His crimson chalice dominated markets, undercut prices, and charmed critics. My Étoile Rouge is admired, but his shadow loomed large. She paused, her gaze steady. Yet I am no fool to think murder would solve such matters. The scandal alone could ruin us all. Poirot tilted his head, his eyes never leaving hers. And yet, Madame, ruin is a powerful motivator. I have heard whispers of your vineyard struggles, debts, distributors lost to Dubois' tactics. Such pressures, they weigh heavily, do they not? Her eyes flickered, a fleeting crack in her composure, but she recovered swiftly. Every vintner faces challenges, she said, her voice cool. I've managed mine without resorting to poison. Poirot's gaze drifted to a desk in the corner where an open ledger lay, its pages marked with figures in red ink. He rose, his movements deliberate, and approached it, his gloved fingers hovering over the pages. "With your permission, madame," he asked, though his tone suggested he would proceed regardless. She nodded, her jaw tightening. The ledger revealed debts to suppliers, a loan from a Parisian bank, and a recent loss of a major contract to Chateau Vermeil. Ambition, Poirot mused aloud. It is a noble thing, but when thwarted it can turn to desperation. Madame Beaumont stood, her posture rigid. You overstep, monsieur. My finances are private, and my rivalry with Etienne was professional, not personal. I had no reason to wish him dead. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Reason, madame, is not always apparent at first glance. The heart, it betrays what the mind conceals. Hastings, setting down his glass, ventured a question. Madame Beaumont, were you near the chalice before the toast? Did you see anyone tamper with it? Her laugh was sharp, almost musical. I was mingling with guests, Captain, far from the dais. As for tampering, I saw nothing unusual. Sophie Laurent handled the chalice, as was her role. Her mention of Sophie was casual, but Poirot noted the slight emphasis, as if redirecting attention. They walked through her vineyard at her insistence, a tour designed to showcase her transparency. The vines were healthy, the workers diligent, but Poirot observed signs of strain, fewer staff than expected, equipment in need of repair. You have built much here, he said, pausing by a row of grapes heavy with promise. But to compete with Dubois, it must have demanded sacrifices. Madame Beaumont's eyes narrowed. Sacrifices, yes, but not murder. I fight my battles in the marketplace, not with poison. As they returned to the parlor, Poirot's mind sifted through her words. Her ambition was undeniable, her motive plausible, yet her composure suggested a mind too disciplined for so brazen an act. Or was it a performance calculated to deflect suspicion? He recalled the residue in the chalice, the deliberate shattering, acts requiring access and precision. Could Madame Beaumont have orchestrated such a plan, perhaps through an intermediary? Back at Chateau Vermeil, Poirot shared his thoughts with Hastings over a light lunch in the chateau's dining room. Madame Beaumont is a woman of steel, he said, slicing a pear with surgical precision. Her vineyard teeters on the edge, yet she presents herself as unshaken. This, mon ami, is the mark of one who plans carefully. Hastings frowned, his fork pausing over his plate. You think she poisoned Dubois to save her business? But how? She wasn't near the chalice. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Not directly, perhaps. But a woman of her intelligence does not dirty her own hands. We must consider accomplices, those with access to the chalice. The conversation turned to Sophie Laurent, whose role as sommelier placed her at the heart of the crime. Poirot recalled her trembling hands, her lie about the chalice's fragility. Mademoiselle Laurent is a piece of this puzzle, he said. But whether she is pawn or player, I cannot yet say. Hastings, ever practical, suggested, could Beaumont have bribed her? Sophie's young, impressionable. Maybe she was desperate for money. Poirot nodded, his mind already tracing connections. A possibility, mon ami. We must learn more of Sophie's circumstances, her family, her finances. As they finished their meal, a footman delivered a message from Inspector Giraud summoning Poirot to the library for an update. Giraud, his mustache bristling with impatience, greeted them with a scowl. The chemist's report confirms cyanide in the Chalice's residue, he said, tossing a paper onto the desk. But the bottle and decanter are clean, as you predicted, Poirot. Still, I say it's Fournier. His temper, his debts. He argued with Dubois days ago. Poirot's smile was polite but firm. Monsieur Fournier is a man of passion, yes, but passion is clumsy. This crime, it is precise. We must look to those with subtlety. Giraud snorted. But Poirot's thoughts were elsewhere, circling Madame Beaumont's ledger, Sophie's unease, and the shattered chalice. The pieces were aligning, but the picture remained incomplete. As they left the library, Poirot murmured to Hastings, "Ambition, mon ami, is a dangerous wine. It intoxicates and it poisons. We shall see who has drunk too deeply." Chapter 6. The Customer's Complaint. The afternoon sun bathed Bordeaux in a golden haze, its warmth softening the edges of Chateau Vermeil's stone façade. Hercule Poirot, his impeccable suit undisturbed by the day's exertions, sat at a small café in the nearby village of Saint-Emilion, his tisane steaming gently before him. Captain Hastings opposite stirred his coffee with a vigor that betrayed his restlessness. "Really, Poirot," he said, his voice tinged with exasperation, "we've been chasing shadows all morning. First Sophie Laurent's nerves, then Madame Beaumont's ambitions. Where does it lead us?" Poirot's eyes, bright with the clarity of his thoughts, met Hastings' gaze. "To the truth, mon ami," he replied, his tone calm but resolute. "Each shadow reveals a contour of the crime. Today we pursue another, Monsieur Lucien Fournier, the customer whose passion for wine may hide a deeper grievance." Poirot had learned from a discreet inquiry to the chateau's staff that Fournier, a wealthy merchant with a taste for extravagance, was in the village, drowning his shock at Dubois' death in the local café's offerings. The decision to seek him out was deliberate. Poirot preferred to observe suspects away from the chateau's stifling atmosphere where masks of decorum might slip. The café, with its checkered tablecloths and clinking glasses, was a hub of local gossip, and Poirot's keen ears caught murmurs of Dubois' murder as they entered. Heads turned briefly, recognizing the small, fastidious man whose reputation preceded him, but Poirot's unassuming smile disarmed curiosity. Fournier sat at a corner table, his bulk spilling over the edges of a wicker chair, a half-empty bottle of claret before him. His gold watch glinted as he raised a glass, his face flushed with more than wine. His tailored suit, though fine, was rumpled, and his eyes, bloodshot, darted restlessly. Poirot approached, his cane tapping lightly, and bowed. "Monsieur Fournier," he said, his voice smooth as velvet, "may we join you? A moment to discuss the tragedy at Chateau Vermeil, perhaps?" Fournier blinked, momentarily startled, then gestured expansively. "Poirot, isn't it? Sit, sit. Dreadful business, Dubois' death. Have a drink, best claret in the village." Poirot declined with a polite wave, seating himself with precision while Hastings accepted a glass, his expression cautious. "Monsieur," Poirot began, his hands folded neatly, "you were a devoted patron of Monsieur Dubois, non? A collector of his crimson chalice, A man of refined taste, Fournier's chest puffed slightly, his pride evident. Devoted, yes. I've spent thousands on his wines. The 2022 vintage. Sublime. I had cases shipped to Paris, London, even New York. His enthusiasm faltered as he met Poirot's steady gaze, and he took a quick sip, his hand unsteady. Poirot noted the tremor, the way Fournier's fingers gripped the glass as if anchoring himself. Yet, Poirot continued, his tone gentle but probing, I have heard of a disagreement, a matter of an exclusive batch of Crimson Chalice that Monsieur Dubois refused to sell you. A slight, perhaps, to a loyal customer? Fournier's face darkened, and he set his glass down with a clink, wine sloshing onto the tablecloth. A misunderstanding, he said, his voice gruff. Etienne was stubborn, said the batch wasn't ready, that I hadn't paid for the last shipment. Insulting, really. After all I've spent. His words tumbled out, laced with indignation, and Poirot's gray cells stirred, sensing a wound deeper than a mere business dispute. He leaned forward, his eyes never leaving Fournier's. And this insult, it angered you, non? Enough to confront him publicly, I understand, days before the tasting? Fournier's flush deepened, and he mopped his brow with a silk handkerchief. A heated moment, nothing more. I raised my voice, yes, but murder, ridiculous. I loved his wine, not the man himself, but I'd never poison him. His protest was loud, drawing glances from nearby patrons, and Poirot noted the desperation in his tone, the way his eyes avoided direct contact. Hastings, sipping his claret, ventured a question. Monsieur Fournier, were you near the Chalice that night? Did you see anything odd? Fournier shook his head, his movements jerky. I was with the other guests, drinking, talking. The Chalice was Sophie's domain. She fussed over it like a mother hen. If anyone tampered with it, she'd know. His mention of Sophie Laurent was casual, but Poirot caught the slight emphasis, a deflection perhaps, to shift scrutiny elsewhere. Poirot's mind turned to Fournier's circumstances. A discreet inquiry to a local banker, facilitated by Poirot's knack for charming information, had revealed Fournier's financial state. A fortune built on trade, but recently strained by lavish spending, yachts, racehorses, and of course wine. His obsession with Chateau Vermeil's vintages was well known, but so were his unpaid bills, including a substantial debt to Dubois. Monsieur, Poirot said, his voice soft but incisive, your passion for wine is admirable, but passion can lead to excess. Did Monsieur Dubois' refusal to sell threaten more than your collection? Perhaps your pride, your reputation? Fournier's hand tightened on his glass, and for a moment Poirot thought he might shatter it. You're fishing, Poirot, he growled. I'm no killer. I argued with Etienne, yes, but that's business. I'd have settled the debt, bought the batch eventually. His words were defiant, but Poirot noted the sweat beading on his forehead, the way his eyes darted toward the door as if seeking escape. The conversation was interrupted by a waiter who delivered a fresh bottle at Fournier's request. As he poured, Poirot observed the man's extravagance, a generous tip, a flourish of his watch, gestures of a man desperate to maintain an image. He recalled the chalice, its deliberate shattering, and wondered if Fournier's wounded pride could have driven him to such an act. Yet the precision of the crime, cyanide in the chalice, not the bottle, suggested a cooler head, one Fournier's bluster seemed unlikely to possess. They left the café, Fournier's protests ringing in their ears, and returned to Chateau Vermeil. In the library, Poirot sought out Inspector Giraud, who was reviewing statements with his usual brusque efficiency. "Fournier's your man, Poirot," Giraud declared, slapping a file on the desk. "His argument with Dubois was public. Half the village heard it. And his debts. He's got motive written all over him." Poirot's smile was polite but dismissive. "Motive, oui, Inspector, but not method. Monsieur Fournier is a man of impulse, not calculation. The Chalice's poison required finesse, access, and timing. Qualities I do not yet see in him." Giraud snorted, but Poirot's thoughts were elsewhere, weaving together the threads of the case. Fournier's grievance was real, but his role in the murder remained unclear. Was he a blustering fool, or a man masking cunning with excess? Poirot's mind returned to Sophie Laurent, who had handled the Chalice, and Madame Beaumont, whose ambition could orchestrate such a plot. Fournier's mention of Sophie, deliberate or not, strengthened Poirot's suspicion that the sommelier held a key to the mystery. As they walked through the chateau's gardens, Hastings voiced his doubts. "Fournier's a loudmouth, Poirot, but a murderer? He seems too scattered." Poirot nodded, his cane tapping the gravel path. "Scattered, oui, but the heart, mon ami, it betrays what the surface conceals. Fournier's pride is wounded, but is it enough to kill? Or is he a distraction while the true killer watches from the shadows?" The vineyard stretched before them, its vines heavy with grapes, and Poirot's eyes gleamed with resolve. "We must dig deeper, Hastings. The truth lies not in the noise, but in the silence between Chapter 7. The Broken Chalice's Tale." The late afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of Chateau Vermeil's library, casting a warm glow over the shelves of leather-bound volumes and the polished mahogany table where Hercule Poirot stood, his gloved hands hovering over the evidence bag containing the shattered remains of the ruby-encrusted chalice. The room was quiet, save for the faint scratch of Inspector Giraud's pen as he reviewed statements in a corner, his impatience with Poirot's methods palpable. Captain Hastings, leaning against a bookcase, watched his friend with a mix of admiration and perplexity. "You're awfully fixated on that chalice, Poirot," he said, his voice low. "What can a few bits of silver tell us that Giraud's chemist hasn't already?" Poirot's eyes, sharp and bright, flicked toward him, a faint smile curving beneath his impeccable mustache. "The chalice, mon ami, is not merely silver. It is the silent witness to a crime, and its tale is far from told." Poirot had requested access to the chalice's fragments, a request Giraud granted with a grudging nod, muttering about wasting time on trifles. The shards, spread carefully on a velvet cloth, glinted under the lamplight, their jagged edges a stark contrast to the chalice's former elegance. Poirot donned his spectacles, a rare concession to necessity, and lifted a magnifying glass, his movements precise as a surgeon's. The silver was thick, its surface etched with intricate vines and the Dubois crest, a testament to centuries of craftsmanship. Yet the breaks were irregular, suggesting force beyond a mere fall. "You see, Hastings," Poirot murmured, pointing to a shard, "this is not the work of accident. The chalice was struck deliberately to shatter it thus." Hastings leaned closer, his brow furrowed. "Struck? But why? To hide the poison?" Poirot nodded, his gaze fixed on a faint powdery residue clinging to the inner curve of a fragment. "Précisément. The cyanide was placed within, but the shattering, it was meant to obscure the method, to make it seem an afterthought of the fall." He beckoned a constable who confirmed the chemist's report. The residue was indeed cyanide, concentrated in the chalice's bowl, not the wine. Poirot's gray cells hummed, the puzzle sharpening. The killer, he said softly, knew the chalice's significance to Dubois, its role in the tasting. This was no impulsive act, Giraud, overhearing, snorted from his corner. You and your theatrics, Poirot. The poison's confirmed. Cyanide, as I said. We're tracing Fournier's movements now. He's our man. Poirot's smile was polite but unyielding. Monsieur l'inspecteur, you chase the obvious, but the truth lies in the subtle. Fournier's bluster does not fit the precision of this crime. We must look to those with access to the chalice before the toast. Poirot's thoughts turned to the moments before Dubois' death, reconstructing the scene in his mind's eye. The grand hall, the gleaming table, Sophie Laurent pouring the wine from the decanter into the chalice, her hands steady then but trembling later. He recalled her claim of polishing the chalice, her insistence on its fragility, a lie, he was certain, given the silver's strength. But why lie? To protect herself or another? He needed more than suspicion, he needed evidence of her actions. Leaving the library, Poirot sought out the chateau's staff, his inquiries discreet but relentless. In the servants' quarters he found Marie, a young maid who had been near the dais during the tasting preparations. She was polishing silverware in a small pantry, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. Poirot approached, his manner gentle to ease her nerves. "Mademoiselle Marie," he said, bowing slightly, "you were in the hall before Monsieur Dubois' toast, oui? You saw Mademoiselle Laurent with the chalice?" Marie nodded, her eyes wary. "Yes, monsieur." She was polishing it as she always did for big events. She seemed nervous, though. Kept looking over her shoulder. Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his interest. "Nervous, you say? And did anyone else approach the chalice while she prepared it?" Marie hesitated, then shook her head. "Not that I saw." She kept it close, set it on the table herself. "But—" She paused, biting her lip. "Go on, mademoiselle," Poirot urged, his voice soothing. "Even the smallest detail may be vital." Marie lowered her voice. "She dropped her cloth once near the table. When she picked it up, her hands were shaking. I thought it odd. She's usually so steady." Poirot thanked her, his mind racing. A trembling hand, a dropped cloth. Small signs but significant in the tapestry of deception. He returned to the grand hall, now empty save for a few constables, and stood where the dais had been. Closing his eyes, he envisioned the scene. Sophie polishing the chalice, her movements precise yet fraught, the cloth falling, her quick recovery. Had she used that moment to introduce the poison, or was she merely anxious under another's command? The chalice's deliberate shattering suggested a plan beyond her nervous demeanor, a plan requiring a colder mind. Hastings, catching up, voiced his confusion. "Poirot, you're certain Sophie's involved, but she seems so young, so loyal to Dubois." Could she really poison him? Poirot paced slowly, his cane tapping the stone floor. "Loyalty, mon ami, is a fragile thing when pressed by need or fear. Mademoiselle Laurent is not the mastermind, I think, but she knows more than she admits. The chalice's tale points to her, but also beyond her, to one who orchestrated this act." They moved to the chateau's office, where Poirot, with Giraud's reluctant permission, examined staff records. Sophie's file revealed a modest background, a village girl trained by Dubois, her rise to sommelier a testament to her talent. But a note caught Poirot's eye, a recent request for an advance on her wages, citing family debts. "You see, Hastings," he said, pointing to the document, "need can drive even the loyal to betrayal. We must learn more of her family, her pressures." As evening approached, Poirot requested a private word with Giraud, who was preparing to interrogate Fournier again. "Inspector," Poirot said, his tone firm, "focus not only on Fournier's temper but on those who had access to the Chalice. Mademoiselle Laurent's actions, they merit scrutiny." Giraud rolled his eyes but nodded, his patience wearing thin. "I'll question her again, Poirot, but don't expect miracles. You and your broken cup won't solve this." Alone with Hastings, Poirot gazed out at the darkening vineyard, the vines silhouetted against the twilight. "The chalice," he murmured. "It was broken to hide the truth, but it speaks still. Sophie Laurent is the key, but she is not alone. Someone guided her hand, and we must find them before the trail grows cold." His eyes gleamed with resolve, the puzzle's pieces aligning, the truth drawing nearer with every step. Chapter 8. A Conspiracy. Unraveled. The library of Chateau Vermeil, with its towering shelves and the faint scent of aged leather, was bathed in the soft glow of lamplight as evening settled over Bordeaux. Hercule Poirot stood at the room's center, his small, neat figure commanding despite its unassuming stature. The air was heavy with anticipation, for he had requested a gathering of the key figures in the tragedy of Etienne Dubois' death. Madame Claire Beaumont, Monsieur Lucien Fournier, and Mademoiselle Sophie Laurent. Inspector Giraud, his mustache bristling with skepticism, leaned against a bookcase, arms crossed, while Captain Hastings sat near the fireplace, his honest face etched with curiosity. The suspects, summoned under Giraud's authority, entered one by one, their expressions a mix of wariness and defiance. Poirot's eyes, bright with the clarity of his deductions, swept over them. Madame Beaumont, her auburn hair impeccable, sat with the poise of a queen, her emerald gown catching the light. Fournier, his bulk straining his tailored suit, mopped his brow with a silk handkerchief, his unease palpable. Sophie Laurent, pale and drawn, stood near the door, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes darting as if seeking an escape. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, his cane resting against a chair, and began to pace, his steps measured, his voice calm but resonant. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his tone carrying the weight of revelation. "We are gathered to unravel the truth of Monsieur Etienne Dubois' murder, a crime most audacious, committed in the full gaze of a crowded hall. The crimson chalice, his pride, was his downfall, poisoned with cyanide and shattered to conceal the deed. But the truth, it cannot be broken so easily." He paused, his gaze settling on Sophie Laurent, whose breath caught audibly. "Mademoiselle Laurent," he continued, "you were the guardian of the chalice, entrusted to prepare it for the toast. You told me it was fragile, that it shattered when it fell. Yet the silver was robust, its breaks the work of force, not accident. Why did you lie?" Sophie's eyes widened, her hands trembling. I didn't lie, Monsieur Poirot," she stammered. "It was old, brittle. I only polished it, filled it with wine." Her voice cracked, and Poirot noted the desperation in her tone, the way her gaze flickered toward Madame Beaumont. He turned to the rival vintner, his expression unreadable. "Madame Beaumont, your vineyard Chateau d'Argent struggles under the shadow of Dubois' success. Your ledger reveals debts, contracts lost to his ruthless tactics. You spoke of rivalry, but it was more a threat to your survival. Did you not seek a way to end his dominance? Madame Beaumont's smile was a blade, sharp and controlled. You accuse me, Monsieur Poirot, without evidence. I competed with Etienne, yes, but murder? I am no barbarian. Her voice was steady, but Poirot saw the faint tightening of her jaw, a sign of strain. Fournier, unable to remain silent, burst out, "This is nonsense." Why drag us here, Poirot? I argued with Dubois, sure, but I didn't touch his blasted chalice. His voice was loud, his face flushed, but Poirot's raised hand silenced him. Monsieur Fournier, your temper is noted, but your role in this drama is secondary. The crime required precision, not passion. A precision I find elsewhere. Poirot resumed his pacing, his voice weaving a narrative as intricate as the tapestries on the walls. The chalice was poisoned before the toast, the cyanide placed within its bowl. Mademoiselle Laurent, you had access, opportunity, and knowledge of its significance to Dubois. But you are young, loyal, unlikely to act alone. Someone guided you, someone with motive and means. He stopped before Sophie, his eyes gentle but unrelenting. Tell me, mademoiselle, of the bank transfer to your account, a sum of 2,000 francs deposited days before the tasting. From whom did it come? Sophie's face drained of color, her hands flying to her mouth. How did you know? She whispered, her voice breaking. Poirot's smile was kind but firm. The little gray cells, mademoiselle, they see what others miss. I made inquiries discreetly with the bank. The transfer was traced to an associate of Madame Beaumont, a merchant known to handle her affairs. He turned to Madame Beaumont, whose composure faltered, her eyes narrowing. Madame, you bribed Mademoiselle Laurent to poison the chalice and shatter it, destroying evidence of your plot. The room erupted. Sophie burst into tears, sinking into a chair, her sobs echoing. I didn't want to, she cried. My family, my brother owes money, dangerous men. Madame Beaumont offered to pay, to save him. I had no choice. Madame Beaumont rose, her voice icy. This is preposterous. A bank transfer proves nothing. You have no proof I orchestrated this. Giraud, startled from his skepticism, stepped forward, his clipboard forgotten. Fournier gaped, his handkerchief limp in his hand. Poirot raised a hand, restoring silence. Madame Beaumont, your ambition is your undoing. Your vineyard faced ruin, your contract stolen by Dubois. You saw a chance to eliminate him using Sophie's desperation as your tool. You instructed her to place the cyanide, procured, I suspect, through your merchant contacts, and to break the chalice, masking the residue. But the shards, they betrayed you. The cyanide was concentrated within, not the wine, and the breaks were deliberate, not accidental. Sophie, weeping, nodded. She told me to do it during the polishing, to use a cloth with the powder. I dropped it by mistake, I was so afraid. Then she said to smash the chalice after he drank, to make it look like an accident. Madame Beaumont's face was a mask of fury, but she said nothing, her silence damning. Giraud, his jaw tight, signaled to his constables. Take them both, he ordered, his voice grudgingly respectful as he glanced at Poirot. Hastings, wide-eyed, leaned toward Poirot. Good Lord, Poirot, you've done it again. How did you piece it together? Poirot's smile was modest. The method, mon ami, the chalice, the lie, the money. They pointed to a conspiracy, and Madame Beaumont's ambition was the thread that bound it. As the constables led Sophie and Madame Beaumont away, the library fell silent, the weight of truth settling over the room. Poirot gazed at the empty evidence bag, the Chalice's tale complete, and felt the quiet satisfaction of order restored. Chapter 9. The motive revealed. The library of Chateau Vermeil, its shelves heavy with the weight of history, stood silent as the echoes of Sophie Laurent's confession and Madame Claire Beaumont's icy silence lingered in the air. The constables had escorted the two women away, their footsteps fading down the corridor, leaving Hercule Poirot, Captain Hastings, and Inspector Giraud in a room charged with the aftermath of revelation. The lamplight flickered, casting shadows that danced across the tapestries as if the chateau itself exhaled in relief at the unmasking of its secrets. Poirot, his small figure poised near the mahogany table, adjusted his tie with a precise flick, his eyes gleaming with the quiet satisfaction of a puzzle solved. Hastings, still reeling, perched on the edge of a chair, his face a mixture of awe and disbelief. Giraud, his clipboard abandoned, paced restlessly, his usual bluster tempered by grudging respect. "Mon Dieu, Poirot!" Hastings exclaimed, breaking the silence. "You've done it again!" To think it was Madame Beaumont pulling the strings and poor Sophie caught in her web. Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile curving beneath it. "Not poor, mon ami," he corrected gently, "but complicit." Mademoiselle Laurent made a choice, though desperation guided her hand. The motive, it is always the heart of the crime, and tonight we have laid it bare. Giraud stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing. "You've got your culprits, Poirot, but I need more than your theatrics for the magistrate. Lay it out. Why did Beaumont do it, and how did you know?" His tone was gruff, but Poirot detected a note of curiosity, a rare concession from the inspector. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, his voice calm but resonant as he began to unravel the final threads of the mystery. "Madame Beaumont," he said, addressing the room as if the suspect still stood before him, "was a woman of ambition. Her vineyard Chateau d'Argent, a monument to her dreams. But Etienne Dubois, with his crimson chalice, was a titan who cast a long shadow. His ruthless tactics, undercutting prices, poaching distributors, threatened her survival. Her ledger, which I examined, revealed debts mounting, contracts lost, a business teetering on ruin. To her, Dubois was not merely a rival, but an existential threat. Murder, it became her solution, but it required a delicate hand." He paused, his gaze sweeping over Hastings and Giraud. "Enter Mademoiselle Sophie Laurent, the sommelier, loyal to Dubois yet vulnerable. Her family, as she confessed, was burdened by debt, her brother entangled with dangerous creditors. Madame Beaumont, through her merchant contacts, learned of this weakness and offered salvation. A sum of money, 2,000 francs, to secure Sophie's cooperation. The plan was simple yet precise. Place cyanide in the chalice, which only Dubois would use, and shatter it after to obscure the method." Hastings frowned, his brow creasing. "But Poirot, how did you know it was Beaumont behind it?" "Sophie could have acted alone, or even Fournier. He had his own grudge." Poirot's smile was patient. "Fournier, mon ami, is a man of passion, not precision. His temper is loud, his motives transparent, a wounded pride, unpaid debts, but the Chalice's poisoning required subtlety, access, and a mind that plans. Sophie had access, oui, but not the resources or cunning to procure cyanide or devise such a scheme. Madame Beaumont, with her network and desperation, was the architect Giraud, his arms crossed, interjected. And the bank transfer? How did you uncover that? Poirot's eyes twinkled. A small inquiry inspector with a banker who values discretion but yields to persuasion. The transfer, masked through a merchant intermediary, linked to Madame Beaumont's accounts. It was the final piece, confirming her influence over Sophie Giraud grunted, scribbling a note. His skepticism giving way to acknowledgement. Poirot paced slowly, his cane tapping softly as he continued. The chalice itself told the tale. Its silver was robust, not brittle, as Sophie claimed. The breaks were jagged, deliberate, meant to scatter the evidence of the cyanide residue. But the residue remained, and the chemist's report confirmed its presence only in the chalice, not the wine. This was no crime of impulse, but a calculated act designed to strike Dubois at his moment of triumph. He turned to the window, gazing at the darkened vineyard beyond. Madame Beaumont chose her moment well, the tasting, a stage where Dubois' fall would be public, his legacy tarnished. She instructed Sophie to apply the cyanide during the polishing, using a cloth to transfer the powder, a method subtle enough to escape notice. Sophie, torn by fear for her family, complied, dropping the cloth in her nervousness as the maid Marie observed. After Dubois drank and collapsed, Sophie struck the chalice against the floor as instructed to fragment it beyond scrutiny. But the shards, they spoke to Hercule Poirot Hastings, his eyes wide, leaned forward. And Sophie's confession? You pushed her to breaking point, Poirot. How did you know she'd crack? Poirot's expression softened. The heart, mon ami, when burdened by guilt, seeks relief. Sophie's trembling hands, her evasive eyes, her lie about the chalice. They betrayed her. When confronted with the bank transfer, her defenses crumbled. She is no hardened criminal, but a young woman caught in a trap of desperation. Giraud, his clipboard now in hand, nodded slowly. You've got your story, Poirot, and it holds. For now. Beaumont and Laurent will face the magistrate, and I'll see to it the evidence is tight. His tone, though gruff, carried a hint of respect, and Poirot inclined his head, acknowledging the truce. The evidence, Inspector, is in the details, the chalice, the transfer, the motive. They form the picture, complete and clear. As Giraud left to oversee the arrests, Hastings rose, his face still alight with wonder. It's like a play, Poirot, with you as the director, pulling the strings, but what now? The case is solved, isn't it? Poirot's gaze lingered on the library's shadows, his mind not yet at rest. Solved, oui, but the aftermath remains. The chateau, it will bear the scar of this betrayal. And we, mon ami, must ensure justice is served. He stepped to the table where the chalice's shards had lain, now returned to police custody. The crimson chalice, he murmured, a wine of beauty poisoned by ambition. A lesson, Hastings, in the fragility of trust. The room fell silent, the weight of the motive, ambition twisted into treachery, settling over them. Poirot's gray cells, satisfied for now, turned to the final act. The restoration of order in a world disrupted by murder. Chapter 10. The Aftermath. The morning sun rose over Chateau Vermeil, its golden rays piercing the mist that clung to the Bordeaux vineyards, casting a serene glow over the estate that belied the turmoil of the past days. Hercule Poirot stood on the chateau's terrace, his hands clasped behind his back. his eyes tracing the orderly rows of vines that stretched toward the horizon. The air was crisp, carrying the faint sweetness of ripening grapes. But the tranquility was a facade. The shadow of Etienne Dubois' murder lingered, a wound in the heart of the chateau's legacy. Captain Hastings, joining him, adjusted his scarf against the morning chill, his face reflecting a mix of relief and melancholy. "It's over, Poirot," he said, his voice subdued. "You've caught the culprits, Madame Beaumont and poor Sophie. Yet it feels unfinished somehow." Poirot's mustache twitched, his gaze distant but sharp. "Over, mon ami? Oui, the crime is solved, the guilty named. But the aftermath, it is a tapestry of consequences woven from human frailty. The chateau, it will not soon forget this betrayal." He turned, his small, neat figure a study in composure, and gestured toward the grand doors. "Come, Hastings, let us take our leave, but not before we ensure the pieces are settled." Inside, the chateau was subdued, its staff moving with the quiet efficiency of those recovering from shock. The grand hall where Dubois had fallen was being cleaned, the dais now bare, the memory of the shattered chalice a ghost in the room. Poirot had requested a final meeting with Inspector Giraud in the library, where the air still held the faint scent of old books and wax polish. Giraud, his clipboard replaced by a stack of reports, greeted them with a nod, his usual brusqueness softened by the case's resolution. "Poirot," he said, his tone grudgingly respectful, "your meddling paid off. Beaumont and Laurent are in custody, and the magistrate has the evidence. Your chalice shards, the bank transfer records. They'll face trial soon." Poirot inclined his head, his expression serene. "Justice, Inspector, is the restoration of order. Madame Beaumont's ambition and Mademoiselle Laurent's desperation led them to betray a man who trusted them. The chalice. It was not only a vessel for poison, but a symbol of their treachery." Giraud, scribbling a final note, muttered, "You and your symbols. Still, you were right about the chalice. I'd have wasted time on Fournier." Poirot's smile was modest. "The little gray cells, they see what haste obscures." Hastings, settling into a chair, looked troubled. "What happens to the chateau now, Poirot? Dubois was its heart, and the crimson chalice. Will it ever be poured again?" Poirot's gaze softened, turning to the window where the vineyards glowed. "The chateau will endure, mon ami, as it has for centuries. Dubois' heir, his nephew, I believe, will take up the mantle, though the vintage of 1925 it is tainted by this tragedy. The crimson chalice may yet flow, but its name will carry a bitter note." A footman entered, offering a tray with a bottle of Chateau Vermeil's earlier vintage in crystal glasses. "A gesture of thanks, Monsieur Poirot," he said, bowing. "The staff wish to honor your work." Poirot waved a hand, his distaste for wine well known. "Non, merci. A tisane perhaps would suit Hercule Poirot better." Hastings chuckled, accepting a glass, and raised it in a quiet toast. "To Dubois, and to you, Poirot, for seeing justice done." As they sipped, or in Poirot's case declined, the conversation turned to the human cost. Sophie Laurent, Poirot learned from Giraud, had confessed fully, her testimony detailing Madame Beaumont's meticulous plan. The cyanide, procured through a merchant with ties to chemical suppliers, had been delivered to Sophie in a small vial, hidden in a bouquet of flowers, a touch of cunning that bore Beaumont's hallmark. Sophie's brother, freed from his debts by the bribe, was now under investigation for his creditors' ties to organized crime, a ripple effect of the conspiracy. Madame Beaumont, defiant to the end, had offered no confession but the evidence. Bank records, the Chalice's residue, Sophie's testimony was damning. Poirot, reflecting on the motive, spoke softly. Ambition, Hastings, it is a fire that warms or consumes. Madame Beaumont chose consumption, her dream of surpassing Dubois twisting into destruction. Sophie, she was the tool, her loyalty broken by fear. It is a lesson, non, in the dangers of the heart unchecked. Hastings nodded, his expression somber. Poor girl. She seemed so devoted to Dubois, to think she'd turn on him. Devotion, Poirot said, is fragile when pressed by necessity. Sophie's love for her family outweighed her duty to her mentor. It is human, but tragic. He paused, his eyes distant. And Dubois, he was not without fault. His ruthlessness, it sowed the seeds of his downfall, driving Beaumont to desperation. As they prepared to leave, Poirot took a final walk through the chateau's gardens, the gravel crunching under his polished shoes. The vines, heavy with grapes, seemed to whisper of resilience, of life continuing despite loss. A young vintner, Dubois' nephew, approached, his face drawn but determined. Monsieur Poirot, he said, we owe you a debt. The chateau will go on, but it will not be the same. Poirot bowed slightly. Monsieur, rebuild with care. Trust it is harder to restore than vines in the car. As they drove toward Paris, Hastings mused aloud. A pity about the Chalice, Poirot. Such a beautiful thing, destroyed. Poirot, gazing at the passing countryside, replied, Beautiful, oui, but beauty can hide treachery. The chalice served its purpose. It spoke the truth. He closed his eyes, his mind already turning to the next challenge, the next puzzle waiting in the shadows. The crimson chalice, its legacy stained, faded into memory, but Hercule Poirot, ever vigilant, carried its lessons forward, ready for the mysteries yet to come.